Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high-income earners come to learn wealth-building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth-building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into today's episode of the Money Insights Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Allen, and with me, as always, Rodney the Pod Zabriskie. Rod, what's up, man?
Hey, I am doing great. Glad to be here.
What's new?
Excited to be here. Oh man, lots going on in the kind of Zabriskie family.
There always is. Always
yeah,
is.
just our son who's been living in Evanston took a job closer back here in Utah, so they're actually gonna be moving back. We'll be moving them tomorrow.
Nice.
So,
you guys.
nice.
I shouldn't even ask, Rod. From now on, you just tell us what you've got going on, and there's always going to be something.
Yeah, it feels that way.
Once you have like, I don't know, what's the number? Once you have like one kid or two kids, that's the case. And once you get 7, it's just chaos all the time in some way, shape, or form.
All the time. Yeah.
And I can confidently say that, Rod, because as you know, I am the 5th of 7 kids myself. So
yeah,
while I have 5, which is a lot, I was 1 of 7. So, okay, Rod. Well, today we're going to do kind of a throwback episode. Like we did some of these, top 10, and this isn't really a top 10 episode, but we're going to be talking about the 10 hidden wealth destroyers that no one talks about. And I wanted it to be more nuanced, more specific, more focused on what we typically see out there in the world and specifically for high income wealth builders. Like, what are some of those things, those pitfalls that could come about that we may not be thinking about, we don't typically see, and at the end of the day, they actually can have a huge, really significant impact on our ability to grow and pass on that wealth to the next generation. So
Absolutely.
That's the goal for today, Rod. We're going to bust it out. We're not going to talk about college football. We're not going to talk about how I'm at the top of our group, Rod. Except that I'm tied with like 5 people at the top of the group in week 2, by the way.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, okay. So you have any questions, Rod, about this before we dive right in?
Well, maybe one thought, and that is often we're covering like a 101 level of alternative investing, whatever. And I think this is getting a little more advanced. We're at least in maybe 200, 300 level.
We're going to 2 or 301. I like it.
And because, I mean, initially, if you're new to alternative investing, then you have to wrap your mind around some of the risks that are just like more of the basic risks, right?
Yeah.
Of investing in whatever it might be, market risk, operator risk, etc. And now today, these kind of hidden wealth stories, just because they're kind of that next layer where a lot of people don't encounter them until they've lived it.
Yes.
We don't want you to have to live it in order to understand it. We want to just bring it out and say, hey, look at these things, understand these things, and realize how they can creep up.
That, my friend, is excellent context. So thank you for throwing that out there. Okay. I've got 10, Rod. I probably could have thrown out a couple of more, but these were my best kind of focal points that I thought, all right, when I look at I kind of lay things out there. I look at our client base. What are people dealing with? I feel like these are just very real issues that you and I deal with. And that, like, to your point, you almost have to already be into that wealth builder space. So this, to your point, isn't really a beginner, but it's going to dive in. And if, by the way, you have questions about the basic stuff, you can totally go to our website and check out the Education Center. And we've got all sorts of videos and stuff for that. So, but that said, we're going to dive in. Let's do it. Okay. So number 1, Rod, we're going to start out a little bit soft and we're going to kind of build up a little bit. But number 1 on our wealth, or our 10 hidden wealth destroyers, is inflation, but specifically inflation on idle bank cash. Who's guilty of this? Christian's raising his hand. As this is my world. This is what I do. And yet at times I look at my bank account and I'm like, I shouldn't have hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting idle in a bank account. Do you know what I mean? And so anybody who kind of gets into this high income space and they start to save and they start to build, especially if you're busy working and doing, a lot of times there's two lanes that people are in, right? There's the work and drive my income, and then there's the invest and drive even more. But those are two different things. And so sometimes it just doesn't correlate quite as well as we want it to. And what happens is that you end up in situations. Okay, so let's just take this let's just do kind of a thought process here. So let's say that I've got 500 grand in my bank account over the next year, and it's earning 5% versus earning 0% or 1%. Like, you could be talking about for doing literally nothing, right? Let me take a step back. I was thinking in my head, like, even something as simple as, instead of having it in my savings account or checking account, I've at least got it in a money market account. Even doing that one step would probably, in today's market, make me an extra 20 grand in that given year. Like, you think about it, 20 grand for doing absolutely nothing. Like, there's people who work a lot of hours to get that 20 grand. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
sure.
again, like, it can become one of those things where, especially as your income grows and as your assets grow, sometimes it can become easy to overlook or just kind of not worry about these kind of smaller things. And yet they're actually things that over time will have a big impact.
Yeah, especially if you're early on in that kind of increase in your income, you're taking security in the fact. You're like, man, this feels amazing to have this money excess, reserves building up for me. But to your point, it sneaks up on you in the sense that it's doing that, it's growing, but it's doing it in these places that are not efficient. So we just need to pay closer attention. And then the second thing I was thinking about as you were saying that is, I think this is maybe even more an issue for business owners, because business owners, just by nature of what they're doing, need more reserves.
They
need more access to cash and liquidity. And so
it becomes important. Okay, so it's even worse than I said, though, Rod. I laid it out as the difference between getting 1% and getting 4 or 5%. But in reality, it's actually, that doesn't consider inflation. So if I have money sitting in the bank earning 0.25%, I'm not just losing out on the opportunity that I could have got by just putting it in a money market, which obviously we're going to talk about a better place to put it. But even by doing something as simple as that, and then I am literally losing value to inflation and time.
Yep.
So it's probably more like double the loss that's happening just by carrying idle bank cash. It's kind of crazy. So we know idle bank cash is a huge problem, but there's a solution, a really easy solution, and that is what we do. The investment optimizer is the solution, right? Like, if I have the high cash value life insurance policy set up, I can move money in and out of it and through it, so that even when it's sitting, quote unquote, idle, it's earning 5% tax free.
Yep.
That's a massive, massive difference. You could argue that that would even outpace inflation while still keeping money completely liquid and completely safe, right? So it's a really simple and powerful alternative. And that's obviously the one that we recommend, and kind of, we talk about it primarily as a way to increase the return on investments, but this is every bit as valuable when you think about it in the overall context. And it's why we put the investment optimizer as the foundational asset that we then go out and invest from.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, it becomes an afterthought. But like you said, the primary focus is on, I want to improve my investment cash flow, my returns. But for the same reason as I don't want to have that money sitting in a bank account, not really doing anything for me, these reserves, call it emergency fund, business reserves, whatever reason that money is sitting there, I don't want that money just not doing anything for me either. So I do this. We have a lot of clients who do this, where I keep my right? I do need to have some money close at hand in the bank account, whatever. But most of my reserves I'm keeping in my investment optimizer policy.
Yep. Makes sense. Okay. Number 2, Rod. Number 2. This is one that a lot of people may not even have heard of. So this number 2 is phantom income. And I've been familiar with the idea of phantom income for a lot of years, because it actually can exist inside of in the life insurance space, right? But why don't you just talk to the audience a little bit about what phantom income is? I mean, it's a lot like what it sounds like, but give us an idea of the context behind phantom income.
Yeah, so it's income that's showing on the books, but you didn't receive any money in that year to represent that income. But now when you're filing your taxes, the IRS is saying, hey, you had income, we're taxing this. And you're like, okay, that's great, but how am I going to pay the tax? I didn't have any money coming to me for the income, but you are saying I need to pay some tax. So how am I going to do that?
Yeah, and it can happen inside of like the real estate space, right? There's situations that can come up that can create this concept of phantom income. And so you just have to be thoughtful in the way that you're structuring deals. We're going to talk a little bit more about that kind of stuff, but obviously that's a huge pain point. And I have seen it happen. I've seen it happen in the life insurance space specifically. So many years ago, there was a business owner in gosh, where was it? I think it was in like Nephi, Utah, right? So it's out there in like the middle of nowhere in Utah. And I had a client, he owned a trucking business. He had purchased a New York life policy like many years ago. And it wasn't like this was just a normal policy. Maybe there was a little bit of overfunding happening, but it was just a policy that he had for a very long time. He got older, like 72 years old, as he was trying to then like leave his business. He was trying to sell it to Cummins, which is a big trucking company. And I remember one of the problems that he ran into, and luckily it wasn't some massive policy, but he decided to just like drain the money from his policy. And I hadn't met him quite at this point yet. This is previous to us meeting him. But he ended up with about $120,000 phantom income, where he was like, because he took the money from his policy and surrendered the policy. Now, let's clarify. Okay. So I want to make sure that we dig into the life insurance side of this, especially since I use that as an example. You can take as much money out of a life insurance contract as you want without paying taxes, so long as the contract stays in force, right? So as long as the contract stays in force, you never have to worry about taxes, because the death benefit then comes in and takes care of that. But if I were to have significant gains in a policy and then just surrender it, just like any other asset, I would then have to pay the tax. And I may or may not actually have had so to be clear, in his situation, he had been using it like progressively over time. It wasn't like he just used it at that moment, right? It was like he had used a lot of it, but then decided to surrender it, having no idea that by doing that, he would then receive this bill. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just kind of a crazy situation. It's something that you just have to be aware of in multiple assets, but obviously life insurance is one of them.
Yeah, maybe I can expand on that just to clarify it even further. Is let's say he has 500,000 in his cash value, and over the course of whatever 10 years, he's using loans against that, building up to the point where 500,000 in the cash value, but he has $480,000 of loans against it. And then he's like, oh well, I'll just, instead of ever having to pay these loans back or whatever his thought process was, he's like, I'll just cash it out. So they send him 20 grand. But as we all know, right, as our audience probably more than others know, he had the full 500,000 sitting in the cash value, and any of the gains that were there, he wasn't being taxed on because he took the money as loans when he took it. But now when he surrenders it, and they're actually taking that cash out of that account and sending him whatever's left after they paid off the loan, well, if he had $100,000 of gains in the account, now all of a sudden he gets a 1099 at the end of the year for $100,000 of ordinary income that he needs to pay the tax on. And well, he got 20 grand, but now he's gonna owe whatever 40 grand.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a tough pill to swallow. So just be thoughtful, be conscientious, know what you're doing. In that case, like we've never had a client or situation like that ourselves. And obviously we have a lot of clients across the country. So it's not one of those things that just happens all the time. And you have to be pretty deliberate most of the time. Like the insurance company even kind of builds in things to try to make sure that you know what's going on in that framework. So just kind of wanted to create some context for that. Okay. Anything else on phantom income, Rod?
I mean, no, I think we've hit on the really the big.
Well, okay. Actually, the other big one that I wanted to hit on, I forgot to mention this. This is the debt forgiveness one. That's a big one in the real estate world. So let's say that I end up making a deal. Let's say that I was in a situation where I got over leveraged or whatever reason, and I went and modified the contract. We did a deal modification, something like that, where someone is forgiving actual debt. That exact situation would also be considered something where you could get phantom income. And so again, they're basically saying, hey, we're going to take the loss, but you're going to pay the tax.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So anyway, there's other places where this shows up, obviously, because we know life insurance so well. That was an easy example. Okay, Rod, number 3. This is an interesting one. I talk about liquidity all the time, but I don't typically talk about it in the context of a forced sell. So number 3 is illiquidity and forced sales. And I have seen this at least a handful of times over my career. Like, it's not an everyday thing, but certainly situations like that one I was just talking about, that really was a liquidity issue. And because of his situation, he felt literally forced to sell. He didn't have the funds anymore. He was dipping into wherever he could. The business wasn't thriving in the way that it was, but it had like a lot of still like really good contracts and value to it. So it was just a kind of, again, going back to that same situation, the issue ended up being, and he ended up getting they forced to sell because he needed money, and they just didn't end up getting the deal that they wanted to. And all of that happens. I always say this, all of that happens because of illiquidity. If you have liquidity, you can smooth over or give yourself time to deal with any financial situation that comes up. But liquidity is absolutely critical. Just don't keep it sitting in your bank account.
Yeah, and a lot of times people are so excited about, they look at their balance sheet and they're like, man, I'm doing great. And probably you are, as long as, like, regardless of what your total asset makeup is, as long as you have some liquidity in there somewhere, wherever that is, then you can feel good. If you don't, then get back there, right? Get back to a place where you have liquidity. And some people will ask, well, how do I know how much? And it's very personal in the sense that we talked earlier about a business owner needs more liquidity than a regular W-2 employee, right?
Sure, yeah.
And someone who's using a high amount of leverage in their real estate investing needs more than somebody who's 50% equity position or something like that, right?
Yep. Yeah, those are good examples for sure.
But this also brings up another issue of, sometimes people will feel like, well, I'm liquid because I have a line of credit. So again, let's say it's this 50% equity person, and they're feeling good because they have a line of credit against that property, which represents a lot of access to cash. But if that's all they're counting as their liquidity, they're still vulnerable, because, as a lot of people learned, especially back in 2008, but also more recently in the kind of during COVID and that whole situation, the bank doesn't have to keep your line of credit open, right? Go read the fine print. They're always going to build in there some provisions where they can come back and either reduce the amount of credit they're offering you, or just close it altogether. And so if that's all you have as liquidity, then maybe
you're going to want to step it up, reevaluate, and make sure that you're doing more with it. Yeah, I totally agree. So obviously, situations like market downturns or forced sales create this like immediate need for cash, and you can't be in a situation where you can't get it. You just can't, right? Because all of a sudden, this is one of the hard things we talk about this when we talk about like 30-year mortgages versus 15-year mortgages and liquidity and things. Like, it's great to have equity in your home and in your business, but the only way to protect those things, if and when things go wrong, is to make sure that you have liquid cash ready to do the things that need to do. So I think we could probably hit on that one all day. It's just super important. To your point, it's important for everybody, but probably if you're a business owner, you've got to be like really locked in and making sure that this is not the game that you're forced to play. Okay, Rod, the fourth one on our list is debt structure, not just the amount. Okay, so the terms of the debt can sometimes be more deadly than the size of the debt. So not too frequently, most often we talk about the dangers of debt being over leveraged, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's absolutely true. But there's another danger in debt, and really you might even say like contracts in general, but like if you don't structure your debt in a way that's thoughtful and intentional, you could find yourself in a difficult situation. Okay, so the people that I'm thinking of, I remember running into, this was again early in my career, and I was meeting with like a family. They made probably $180,000 a year. They had a nice house, and but it was like a $4,500 payment or something like that. And we're going through and we're like looking at the income, and they were about to jump on their 3 or 5 year arm. And he had just lost his job, right? So they had been making good money, but he had just lost his job, and they didn't have a lot of reserves. And they had this house situation coming to where it was about to balloon to a payment that was $2,000 more than and they were barely, covering everything as they were.
Gotcha.
Like it was okay. So like maybe this is less of an issue with our audience day to day, but I just think, again, if we're trying to put out the warnings of the things that could go wrong, the things that could be wealth killers, just making sure you're thoughtful about not just the amount of debt that you're taking on, but the way that you structure it, right? So that you don't end up putting yourself in a situation. And it could just be like the timing of the way that you structure debt that could be problematic. So that's kind of my thought process around debt structure, Rod.
Yeah, and I think that's good to be aware. In that situation, it was a scheduled increase, right? When
Yes,
the adjustable rate mortgage would adjust to whatever the going rate was. I'm aware of some friends who got into a situation where it wasn't a timing trigger, but it was going back to what I talked about earlier with banks. They'll put in language where they can call the loan, they can decrease the credit. Well, they can also adjust the loan rate, the interest rate on the loan. And this was a surprise to them. They didn't even realize that the bank could do this. And all of a sudden they're exercising this provision of the loan. And now similar situation, all of a sudden, whatever they were comfortable, but close to the line in terms of the monthly payment that they were at. And all of a sudden that increases, and they're scrambling, going to get second jobs and doing other things so that they can keep up now with the updated loan.
All right. So moral of that story, structure your debt thoughtfully and intentionally.
Yeah. And know what's in there.
Yeah. And know what's in there, and have like a team. Like we always go back to this, like have a team that you swing things by, so that, an attorney, you shouldn't just go through contracts and assume. I wish that I could say that I haven't learned this the hard way, but I have absolutely learned the hard way that you have to be cautious even when you don't think that you should be.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. It's better to just have a process regardless of the situation. You have a process that you go through to do these kinds of things. Okay. Number 5, Rod, lawsuit and creditor exposure. This is actually one that we talk about, pretty often. We've all heard stories of situations where people, somebody gets into a car accident, or we've talked about the story, someone's child gets into a car accident, and all of a sudden, guess what? That's all exposure that exists for us. And we can choose to either take that exposure on with our income and savings and assets, or we can, do it a different way. And we always talk about the value of just making sure that we're properly insured. We're going to get into that. But the long and short of it is, you've got to make sure, again, that you're being thoughtful and intentional, so that you don't end up in a situation where you're, in a lawsuit. Because, well, it can wipe things out fast. Not only if you regardless of whether you're right or wrong on a lawsuit, that's an important element to remember. That doesn't matter. It matters, but just the process of going through it is arduous. It's expensive. It's very much a wealth killer. So trying to avoid being in lawsuits and dealing with that creditor exposure, you just have to do everything possible to shield yourself in a way that, gives you the protection that you need.
Yeah. So avoiding lawsuits, that's great. But like you're saying, sometimes you can't avoid it. So now it's the how are you structured to protect yourself? And this is where LLCs come in,
Yes.
trusts come in, and relying on people who can really advise you on this. The maybe nice thing that a lot of states have done is they've made it relatively easy to create an LLC. I can go and create my own
for sure.
LLC, and yet even I have an MBA. I've been in this business for a long time. I still learn little nuances of things from time to time, and again, relying on our attorneys, whatever, as we're structuring things, because often when you think you've protected yourself by whatever setting up the LLC, sometimes it doesn't work, or sometimes you don't realize, well, I have to take certain steps like meeting minutes and these other things to keep my LLC legitimate. Otherwise, they're like, well, you're LLC in name, but you're not acting that way, and so we're not going to let you have the protection, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. So you can feel like you've done all the right things. The point is, like, make sure that you don't take that for granted and are leaning on your team of experts who can help you with that.
Yep.
Okay, Rod, number 6.
Sorry, before we leave that one,
something? Yes.
Well, you hinted on it, but umbrella insurance.
Yeah, hit it.
It's the easiest, most like potentially impactful thing that you can do if you do not have umbrella coverage just built in with the same place where you're doing your home and auto. Because if this is the first time you're hearing this or new, or you've heard it and you haven't done it, like this moment, like pause this podcast, call up, reach out to your
Rod's calling
agent.
it out. Don't reach out to us, to be really clear. That's not what we do, but you absolutely should have.
Yeah.
If you're a wealth builder and investor, spending, a few $100 a year to have $3-4 million of umbrella coverage that can take it's a lot of peace of mind for not a lot of money.
Yeah, because you have limitations if you're in the car accident and you're like, oh, but well, that's why I have insurance. Okay, great. But you have limitations on that. If you get sued for $3 million and your max on your coverage is $750,000, you're going to have to make up the difference unless you have an umbrella policy. And then no matter where that exposure comes from, whether it be in the car, whether it be liability coverage, someone trips and falls on your property or whatever, the umbrella coverage will help you exceed all of those limits if that lawsuit comes down on you, and it's bigger than what those limits are. So go do it. Okay. I'm not an advisor, but I'm telling you, go do it.
Go do it. I don't think anyone's going to sue you for telling them to go do it. Okay, Rod. The next one is concentration risk, and I'm sure this hits close to home for a lot of people, but talk about what concentration risk is and why it's on our list here.
Yeah, the corollary is diversification, right? So concentration risk is having too much of your assets in one place. And, we often talk about this as a beginner, you kind of have to start there, right? As we're building our business, and most of our wealth is in our business, well, that's how we're building the wealth. And so of a necessity, that's where it starts. If you're new to this and you're like, well, I have to start somewhere, I'm going to go pick a property in a location, that's how I'm getting started. Okay, great. You're going to have some concentration risk to begin with, but you need, as you're growing and building, then you need to spread yourself out. And so often it's like, oh, well, I have 2 properties, so I don't have concentration risk. Oh, well, great. But are those 2 properties, is it the same type? Is it,
are they both single family homes or whatever?
Yeah, next door to each other or whatever. Okay, well, I'm not saying you don't have any diversification in there, but for all intents and purposes, if something happens to one, most likely it's going to happen to the other, right? So geographically being in different places, being in different asset classes. So again, even if it's in real estate, but you have some multifamily, some single family, some whatever commercial, some that's syndicated, some that's in an equity fund, whatever, then that starts to spread yourself. But get beyond, go beyond the real estate and start investing in other things that bring a different risk profile. That's the key. Because if I'm in a bunch of different things, but they all carry the same risk profile, the same economic triggers create problems on all my stuff, well, I have this concentration risk.
Yep. And I'll just add this. I think you nailed it, but I'll just add this, like emphasize, because this is what we've seen more recently. Operators, like we definitely have to be diversifying operators. And obviously, again, this hits close to home for a lot of listeners because when we get into the investment space, it's really easy to get comfortable with the people who teach us some of those new concepts and they're doing really well. And so it's like, okay, I do one with them. That felt good. It worked. Let's just do another and another. And all of a sudden you're putting all of your eggs with one operator. And that again creates a level of risk that, can come back to hurt you.
Yep.
And it may not, but it can. And that's the biggest point. Okay, Rod, number 7, okay, this is a big one. Counterparty and documentation risk. Okay, so what are we talking about here? We're talking about a deal failing simply because of people, paperwork, or partners. It's just like the stuff, right? It's the admin, it's the details, it's the intention. What comes to your mind when you think of this?
Well, this kind of brings together a few points that we've already talked about. So the one you just barely talked about, an operator, if all of your stuff is with an operator and they run into an issue like this, well, all of your stuff is exposed. It also goes back to what we talked about with knowing the debt structure, not just the debt amounts. And again, this was an issue with the increasing rates back in 2022. All of a sudden people realized or found out, oh, the way the debt was structured doesn't work well, not only because the interest rates were increasing, but maybe they had to contractually they were required to go out and buy rate locks or things like that, and that takes money, and they're on a clock that they have to buy that rate lock at a certain time, and those are the kinds of things that came in and kind of created that problem. So it's both of these things, right? The counterparty, the operator who was maybe exposing you to that risk but you didn't know it, and then secondly the documentation risk of, well, what's in there, what ultimately created the problem. Well, most people didn't realize that was a problem until it became a problem.
Well, and when I think about counterparty risk, Rod, that's pretty wide and broad, right? Because it could be someone you're investing with, but it could be just a partner. Like it could be a business partner. It could be like all of these elements.
Could be the lender,
like,
could
be a lender, anybody that's not you, that's outside of that. You have the potential exposure of, or at least a risk that goes along with that. So what are we saying? We're not saying that you can just eliminate this risk, but we're saying to be thoughtful about it so that you're not, you're working with people that trust, right? Those are the biggest things. I say and I think like's important, but knowing and trusting is a lot more important.
Trusting, not just because you feel like they're trustworthy in terms of like transparency, honesty, those kinds of things,
which
but
is
also
a big one.
Competency,
yes.
Demonstrating the idea that they've been doing this, they understand how to put these things together, not just because they've had success doing it in the past, but maybe they've seen some of these things come up and they're like, well, we do X, Y, and Z now because we're avoiding whatever the documentation stuff that we ran into 10 years ago or whatever.
Okay, Rod, man, we are cruising through this list. We're at number 8, and people are going to get really excited about this one. Insurance gaps. Okay, now this sounds more like, when I read this initially, it kind of sounds more like what we were talking about earlier, where I could really use an umbrella policy to come in and cover my gaps. Here, what we're talking about is actually gaps within the contracts that you actually, so making sure that you know what you're getting with your insurance. So I'll give you an example. I met with this is just so funny. I met with a really successful doctor. He was making, this is many years ago, it was a referral from a local CPA firm, and he was making around $900,000 a year. Unfortunately, he was in a rough spot. He had about a $1.2 million tax bill that he had not been paying for some time. And apparently he and his wife had a massive spending problem. But that has nothing to do with this. Here's where the insurance gap conversation comes in. I'm like, hey, let's review your insurances and see like what's actually going. Because this is back when I was more a traditional advisor. I hadn't moved into like more of this alternative space at that point. So I was treating it like, hey, I'm going to do a financial needs analysis, understand your situation, and we're going to go and figure out how to make things better than what they are now. And obviously that's when I uncovered like the IRS thing. But in addition to that, when he gave me his insurances, he handed me like, I kid you not, like 10 Aflac policies. And he's like, oh, here's my insurance. And I was like, great. So I'm like looking through and I'm like, these are all like, they're just like, what do you call their accident policies? I'm trying to think of the wording. Supplemental. They're all supplemental. He didn't have any core insurance. Now this is a little different than having like a nuanced gap inside your insurance. But in his world, he literally was missing like the core and thinking he was paying, by the way, like at that time, like $1,800 a month for these Aflac policies.
Oh, wow.
It was just a nutty situation. Now, again, we don't run into that often. And I think the concept here or the point here is, one, make sure that you have the right insurances, but then number two, make sure that you know what's in them and that you're covered. So this kind of goes back to, it does go back to something like the umbrella policy. I have to know the limitations of my core policy, right? I don't want to be thinking that I have $2 million when I only have one or whatever that looks like, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, those are some of my thoughts.
Where this usually sneaks in is maybe I was really thoughtful and careful when I set up my home and auto coverage at some point, but then I'm going to get quotes from other groups to, hey, man, I want to make sure that I'm, paying, not overpaying for what I have. So you send that out, but if you're not really careful to line them up and make sure that they're giving you an apples to apples, because it's very easy for them when they're quoting it to reduce your coverage in order to give you a better price. And if you're not seeing that, then you think you still have all that great coverage, but you don't.
Okay, I have another one, and this one is a little painful to bring up, Rod, or just another thought on this. Just because I've seen it, unfortunately, within our own industry, and that is situations where, and unfortunately, we've seen this firsthand again, situations where I go to purchase something and I think I have something very different than what I actually have, whether that's because of the agent that I worked with and that's like whatever. I'm just thinking of one specific situation, Rod, in my head. And I'm thinking like, okay, the last thing that we ever want to have is be in a situation where we think we have one thing, but then when we read through the fine print after it's already in and going, we realize that it's not at all what I thought it was.
Yeah.
That's a really painful experience. And so again, we want to make sure that kind of stuff is really, you're covering it on the front end. And I'll say this, like when I'm thinking of this situation, it was certainly not the fault of the person who ended up being kind of the victim of this, but like what we want to do is make sure that we do everything possible on the front end in hopes that we don't end up in that situation. And we can't always avoid it, but we can a lot of times.
Yeah. Pay attention on the paperwork. I'll tell you where I thought you were going, and that is, we see agents, life insurance agents, who will always be recommending that you replace your coverage.
Oh,
so maybe they changed the company and they're like, oh, hey, now that I'm with XYZ company instead of ABC company, let's just move all your policies over. And if it's term insurance, fine, no big deal, as long as you're okay with an increased premium because you originally got the policy 5 years ago or whatever, then that's fine. But if you're in a whole life policy or any kind of cash value life insurance and they're continually suggesting that you replace that, there's a cost every time you do that. And I think our audience knows that more than others. They'd probably be more savvy on this. But anytime someone's suggesting you replace a cash value life insurance policy, they better have a very good reason, can demonstrate the value that you're going to get, the additional value you're going to get by replacing it. Because if it's just like, hey, for convenience or for whatever, because of me as the agent, I think you should do this. Well, it's ridiculous.
I bet, Rod, if we were to just like pull out to all of our high income listeners, you would have a good handful that have been down that exact road where they bought a policy, somebody else came in a few years later, said, oh, that's not a good one, you should do this instead. And now they're almost starting over. Now, maybe you're not starting over entirely. There's obviously this 1035 exchange. I can move money into one. But again, to your point, there is a dragging cost on that. So unless they're going to provide growth far above and beyond the way that what you were getting initially, you just shouldn't mess with that, right? Because well, anyway, whole life policies are really solid once they've been enforced for a long time. Even if they're not structured well like we do it, they're still just really solid assets that you know what you're going to get. So to your point, I like the way you said it. You just better have a really good reason if you're going to recommend, or as the client in this situation, if I'm going to replace a policy, I better have a good reason to do it. Okay, Rod, let's talk about estate and liquidity gap, or not estate and liquidity gaps, estate liquidity gaps. Why is that a wealth killer?
People are very careful, intentional in the way that they put trusts together or do different things, family limited partnerships, whatever it might be, to most efficiently pass assets on to the next generation, and have instructions on what, how that should be handled when that transfer is taking place. And we see it, if you don't build into that some liquidity, then it just has problems. So for example, if my whole portfolio is my business, some real estate properties, etc., and I'm feeling really good, like, hey man, I'm doing my kids a favor, but then as they receive it, there's all of a sudden bills that need to be paid, things that need to happen, and they're like, okay, so where's the cash to do it with? And there is no cash. Now all of a sudden we get back to what we talked about earlier, forced sales and other things like that.
And we've seen this.
It
happens all the time.
Everything unravels really quickly if you don't have the liquidity.
Yep. So do all that core work at the beginning, but goes back to liquidity in relationship to passing money on to the next gen. Like if you're passing on a big real estate portfolio, I was thinking of my grandpa as an example. It wasn't like massive, but it was like, $7-8 million that went to the next gen through his real estate deals. He had purchased them when he was like 40, 50 years ago. So there was like very little cost basis in it. There was very little cost basis in it. And of course it was fortunate because we got the step up in basis. So, but there still was a time frame there. It still took time to actually sell those assets. And luckily my grandpa also had, $500,000 of cash in some places where they could manage any other expenses that were coming about. And there are always expenses, right? Not just a funeral. There's always other little things that need, there might be outstanding medical bills or whatever that have to be resolved. Mm-hmm. And to your point, if I don't have the liquidity, okay, well, guess what? There's a really good way to do it. Life insurance, right? Yeah. So if you're some, again, foundational asset, if I believe and understand in using the investment optimizer strategy as my core foundational asset, I cover a lot of these issues immediately. And one like this, obviously that cash could be a great place to hold liquidity, but it's also a death benefit that then comes in and pays relatively quickly, right? You can get a death benefit within 30 days of passing on, right? So maybe even sooner than that in situations. I think we've had death claims that went out faster than that. So that's another option that just kind of takes a lot of this kind of problem and pain off the table. And it's really, really easy to put into place, and simultaneously creating value in multiple other areas. And of course, keeping you from destroying wealth due to like idle cash in the bank and stuff like that.
Yeah. And going back to the documentation thing, make sure that the beneficiary is set up correctly, because if the assets are held in XYZ trust, but the beneficiary is going directly to an individual, and you're just thinking, well, they'll use that cash to, well, maybe they won't, right?
Yeah.
Maybe something else happens.
Got to be careful about that.
So that's one thing. But then the other thing too is, even like, let's say you have a bunch of money, a bunch of cash in a bank account or something, but that bank account was in the individual's name, not in the name of the trust. Well, now it has to go through probate before that can happen, and that obviously takes a long time. In the meantime,
and that's
if you
a
don't have the
nuance.
liquidity, if you don't have the liquidity that is lined up with the real estate, the business, whatever the asset is, now you're in trouble, right? Just from a timing issue, not because the cash wasn't there, because it wasn't lined up, or it took more time than you had, 9 months, a year to get through probate, and all of a sudden you don't have the liquidity.
Okay, Rod, that brings us to our final wealth destroyer. It's one that we talk about fairly often, but the traditional world is certainly not talking about this. They're banging a different drum, and that is qualified plans. I'm not even I have over-reliance on qualified plans, but I'm just going to put qualified plans in general. And I want to be careful about how we frame this, because we're not the people who are saying never put money in your 401k. Like I never want people to think that because we're putting this out there. I want people to understand that there's a time and a place for things, but in most situations, well, for a high income earner, I just have to be really thoughtful. I have to think this out. I have to ask myself some simple questions. One is this really going to become a tax advantage? Right? We put it out there all the time. If I'm 30 years old and I'm just starting and I'm earning a great income, but I've got the next 30 years to save, like what are the chances that in 30 years I'm going to be making less money, and and the tax rates are going to be lower than they are today? Like these things are just super, super important, and they will absolutely shave, we'll say commas to make it extreme, commas off your wealth. Maybe not multiple commas, but the point is we see it all the time. People get really excited about that in the moment. It's such a nice fix. Like, oh, if I put it there now, I don't have to pay this as much tax. And yet you may just be creating for yourself a much bigger tax bomb down the road. So being thoughtful about qualified plans, we talk about it all the time. We're raising the red flag, but it doesn't seem like that's stopping anybody, because that it's still full steam ahead from what I can tell.
Yeah. So creating tax bomb for yourself, and going back
family,
to maybe the last point, the estate thing, it becomes even worse for them, because again, if I set it aside and I'm in a 25% tax bracket, but then when my kids are inheriting the qualified plan and the government says, you got to take it out of that plan pretty much immediately, well, now that forces them to the highest tax bracket, because it's their income plus this now becomes additional income now,
and it becomes even more painful.
Worse.
So like you're trying to do something, like you're trying to, most people that we talk to are literally trying to create generational wealth which means that it moves from one generation to the next, right? Specifically, I'm living and I want that to go to my kids and my family. Well, that is a huge drag on what that looks like. And I remember I had a client that this was a physician in California, and they had, this was one of the biggest policies I ever did in my early career. It was like $110,000 policy, but it was an estate planning play, right? It wasn't like investment optimizer strategy, high cash. It was more, hey, we need to cover the death benefit. But I remember after going through and doing the math on the 8 million that he had and looking at what that would look like when it passed to the next generation, because it was all in qualified plans. Okay. He was literally in California going to pay 55% of that out. So that 8 million had turned to 3.5, or whatever the math is on that. So like, it is crazy to think about the impact that can have. But you kind of, like, the easiest way to do it, this is a little bit painful, but sometimes I do this, Rod, to keep because I have qualified money, right? So, but I have to make sure I keep my own advice in check. And so sometimes I'll look at it and I'll be like, okay, what's my balance? And I'll be like, all right, now I just have to minus like 35% from that. Yeah. And now I have a real balance, right? That's what I actually have available to me. So anyway, that again, just being aware. And so there's really easy ways to fix this. One, we talk about diversification of assets, but diversification in tax strategy, right? So if you have money, let's say that you have a great qualified plan option, you're a high income earner who is putting $100,000 a year into your defined benefit plan. Like that is still can be really valuable. And especially if I'm getting some contributions that are coming in from like an employer, right? That's free money. I don't want to say no to that. That would be ridiculous, right? On the other hand, I don't want to make that all of my money. So what do? I simply try to make sure that I have Roth money. That's where, again, the investment optimizer, that's why we like it. One of the value propositions of it is that it's tax-free money. And when I pass it on to the next generation, it's not just tax-free at the cash value level, it's tax-free at the death benefit level. So like, there's really simple things that I can do. The simplest one is to just lay it out, make sure that I'm being thoughtful. I keep saying that, thoughtful and intentional in the way that I actually structure the tax side of my assets. And again, make sure it's not all qualified.
And if you are contributing to a qualified plan, especially if it's a 401k, the move has come around more recently over the last 10-ish years.
Yeah.
So that
Roth.
more 401ks are offering a Roth option. They may not have been when you originally got into the plan. And
yeah,
so
great
go
point.
Find out, go ask. And if they're not, suggest that they consider adding that as an option.
Yep. And I do think that has become way more common. Now, for high income earners, it's still hard to do that because they're like, oh, but that means that I'm going to have I'm going to pay more taxes this year.
Yeah.
But to your point, it's the best thing you can do. And like, again, just using basic logic, I feel like I've gone through this logic on the podcast and presentations and everywhere a million times, but it's borderline illogical to think and expect the taxes are likely to go down. We have some key factors. One, we're actually at one of the lowest tax rate timeframes in the history of our country. We have massive rising debt. We have, government programs that are in peril, and we have this not just rising debt, but the massive existing national debt. So like all of these factors going against it, like I look at that and I'm like, what logic do people have to think, you know what, I'm going to defer this and pay much less later? Like things look better in the future. It's crazy, right? So anyway, I could go on and on about that, Rod. Is there anything else you want to say about qualified plans?
I just want to clarify on the Roth, when I made that point about the Roth 401k, I was very specific on that because Roth IRA, as a high income earner, you probably already know you probably can't contribute to Roth IRA.
Good point.
But a Roth 401k, they don't have those same income limits, so you can still contribute. There's going to be a cap into how much you can put into the Roth IRA.
But it's just the same as any qualified plan.
Yep. Doesn't matter how much you make, you can contribute to a Roth IRA, a Roth 401k.
I don't even know what the number is. It's like 17.5 right now, something like that. It used to be 50. Anyway, it goes up every year. But still, like the point is, look and see if you have that option. And I really like that idea, Rod, of if you started 10 years ago and just that wasn't on the table, like to at least revisit and see if it is. And then maybe you don't go the whole make all of it suddenly Roth, but maybe you go 50-50 or you start, but again, you've got to start building in that balance so that when you get to retirement and when you're starting to drive income, you're able to do it in a tax efficient way, right? Instead of being one of those people we talk about who gets to retirement and feels like they can't spend their money because every time they do, they just feel like they're getting taxed more and more, right?
Yep.
So that's the warning. Okay, Rod, is there anything else that you want to touch on today, or did we cover them?
I think I hit everything I was thinking about.
Okay. So what's the call to action for our listeners after this?
I mean, pay attention. Like hopefully these will have maybe hit some nerves, either potentially, bringing up exposure that you weren't thinking about before, but now you are. You can go and look at the stuff you have existing, make sure you're not exposed where you didn't realize. But then moving forward, as you're doing your due diligence on new deals, understand and make sure that you know at least where you stand on these things going in.
Okay, Rod, I just have one last thing that I forgot and I want to make sure I bring up. Number 6 we brought up was concentration risk, right? And I want to give a quick shout out to the IIS. So the Investment Insider Series is here really to help all of us be less, what's the right word? I was going to say less
concentrated.
Less concentrated. Yes, less concentrated. Yeah. We want to have more opportunities to meet and see good people who are doing unique and good things. And luckily there's a lot of people in the investment space who are doing a really great job. And so our goal inside of the Investment Insider Series, and hopefully you're attending those. If not, I would encourage you to. It's an opportunity to get to know more operators, other types of investments that I may not typically see. And then, of course, you take this process and you go and you do the due diligence in addition to what we've done. But that is a really easy way, again, to look for opportunities to not be concentrated. And Roddy gave me an opportunity to give a shout out to the IAS. Okay. Thanks everybody so much for listening to us, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.